Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I am going to be your host today, and this is episode 254, where we're going to be talking about how to approach paid ads for your indie game and beyond. Now, making any type of investment in your indie game is a big decision, especially when considering paid advertising. While there can be some risk involved with ads, there's also a lot that can be gained, even outside of the results you get from running your campaign. That's why today I'm going to discuss the right way to approach ads and how doing so will help you with all of your marketing efforts. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today I have just a really exciting, different type of show for you. As I mentioned in the intro, I just mentioned I'm going to be discussing the topic today, right? So how I wanted to do this was basically just make it like, as I mentioned earlier in a few episodes, that we're going to have more master classes. So I wanted to take a really different approach and to really be able to dive deep into this particular subject. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just going to be really about paid ads. Yes, that's going to be the focus. That's going to be the framework that we're working with. But it's also going to, I'm going to show different ways that having this mindset, this approaching ads mindset, is going to help you with everything else that you are doing with your marketing of your game. Okay. So that's my goal. I'm really excited to share it with this whole discussion with you, because I think it's a lot of things that people don't really think about when they're doing, everything from a promotional and even somewhat of a business perspective. So really excited on that front. Now, so the format's going to be a little bit different, where obviously there's no need for an introduction here. At least I don't think. If you don't know me by now, then I don't know. It's okay if you don't. That's fine. But one thing I will share with you, just in terms of what I've been doing lately, is the staple here on the show. What game are you playing now? And quick sad story a little bit. As some of you may have mentioned in the past, I'm a pretty big fan of the Final Fantasy IP. And as much as I love it, sadly enough, I have never played through an entire game or beaten an entire game of any of the Final Fantasies. And I'm afraid that it's going to haunt me to the grave. So what I've started recently is I'm like, all right, fine, I'm going to make this happen. And I'm kind of starting to play all the games through. I don't know if I'll continue some other ones I have at the current save states that they're in. Might start from scratch, but I'm at least starting from the beginning. So I borrowed my neighbor's NES Mini and starting with Final Fantasy 1. And it's been a bit of a challenge lately, because it's, very different compared to more of the modern games, if you will. But it's still fun, still having fun with it. So that's what I've been playing now. All right, so let's get to this discussion, because I'm really excited to have this really masterclass style episode. Again, I think you'll get a lot of value out of it, but I hope that you do from listening to this. So again, our topic: how to approach paid ads for your indie game and beyond. And again, a good portion of this emphasis can also, or these concepts I'm sharing with you, can also be applied to everything that you're doing. Okay, so let's get into the discussion. What's the kickoff question here? Ultimately, I think it really comes down to asking yourself, and this is probably something you're asking yourself regularly if you are considering ads at all, is should you even run them, right? Well, to lead off with that, I would say it really depends on your reasons and objectives, okay? So why would you run ads? Is it to get game sales? Is it to get more email subscribers? What is that reason, right? And I know it sounds really basic, but it's really important you know what that is, and even look beyond a little bit further for that. Because if you don't, basically you could be like, oh, I'll some people might approach it, oh, I'll run on Facebook, I'll run on Twitter, or wherever the platform might be. And if you don't have a specific reasoning as to why or how or what that game plan is, essentially, you might find that you're running on a platform that's might not be the best one to consider. So that's why you should really start thinking at first, what is it to do? Are you trying to get more wish lists? Are you trying to get game sales? Is your game in early access? Are you getting ready for a Kickstarter campaign? What is the reason that you're doing that right at that moment in time? What's the specific campaign goal, and what are you trying to achieve with it? All right. So very simple question to ask, right? So then from there, it also depends on your resources and time. Do you even have the money to run a campaign, right? And you don't necessarily need a lot, but you do need some money, and you do also need time, because on the flip side of it, there are other alternatives that you can consider too, right? Like you could just have a organic presence, like if you're just, making posts on Reddit, for example, and without using their paid platform. Like there's any number of other different things to do. Or also, are there events that you think that there could be a better return on that you would like to attend opposed to running ads? Like there's any number of other things to consider too. And also more specifically, resources and time. If you only have so many resources, like let's say you're a small team, who's going to be running the ads? Is it you? Is it someone else that's going to be doing it? What is that going to be taken away from your project and such, right? Or do you have the means to hire someone? Things like that. And I'm going to go into more details, like those specific items too are important as well, okay? So again, it really depends on your time and your resources that you have available, and are there other things you should consider over ads, all right? And I'm not, again, I'm trying to be as cognizant of everything else that you guys are doing while I'm sharing this information with you. All right. It also depends on your game costs, okay? And what I mean specifically is what is going to be the price point of your game. So in a nutshell, if the game costs, your price point is too low, it might not be worth it. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more later, but that's still something to really be cognizant of, because just because you want to run ads and stuff, if you're not getting the results or cost per acquisition and things like that you need to be, then you could just be throwing money away. And that's not the goal with ads, okay? So again, it really depends on your game price point too. And also depends on, again, like I mentioned before, your overall goals. What are you really trying to achieve with the reason for running your ads, okay? All important things that you need to consider when you're asking yourself, should I run ads? So at a high level, very basic stuff to think about and collaborate and work with your team on in terms of, what are some of the reasonings why we should do this, right? And I think when you come across that point of having that discussion, a lot of the next things that we're going to be talking about right now are going to be really helpful in allowing you to make that decision, all right? Okay. Now, the next point is I want to discuss knowing the platform and your audience. Okay, so how many times on the show have I talked about knowing your audience, right? Or not just me, like everybody on the show. Again, super important. But when it comes to ads, and again, this is relating to everything else you might be doing, Reddit, Imgur, whatever platform it is, it's really important to know the platform and the reason why people use it. So when it comes to ads, I really feel that a lot of, let's say, newcomer advertisers or businesses or whatever, think of it more in terms of hey, these ads are like TV or billboards or whatever the case may be. They think of it, it's just there, it's a distraction, get them out there and stuff, right? Well, it's not the way to approach it. And going back to this initial point, knowing the platform, and that's the reason. Because if you are planning to use paid ads on a particular platform, you need to really understand what that platform stands for. For example, Twitter. It's very it's very entertainment focused and casual. Same with Facebook. People are going to these platforms to kind of unwind, be entertained, have fun, catch up with other people, really understand and know the reason why these platforms exist. And also be cognizant of what are the goals and objectives of the platforms, right? What are they trying to do? For example, Facebook, do they want people going off-site, off their platform to your website all the time? Not really. I know it sounds like kind of counterintuitive there, but they want people on the platform as much as possible, because what does that mean? It means more people they can advertise to. That's their main source of revenue there, right? So it's looking at it from different angles. Why are people there to begin with is probably going to be the focus one. But again, being cognizant of what's the platform's goals. And I'm going to get into those a little bit soon too. It's kind of interesting when you start thinking, peeling back all these layers in terms of thinking in these different ways. And again, I'm going to say this again, probably like 20, 40 other times when I say, and again, this could also apply to everything else that you're doing on these platforms or just in general with your marketing, okay? Because, like I said, being cognizant of why people are on the platform and what the platform's goals are can really help you leverage the platforms to the best of your ability to make the most out of your advertising or any other campaigns that you're running. All right, another thing, like I mentioned before, know your audience. So we've talked about player journey, but also like player personas, right? What are their interests? What are the behaviors? And any number of things like that. Because when you're advertising, a lot of platforms, especially Facebook, allow you to be super focused on these interests and layer them, and which is a really cool thing to be able to do, because the more focused, to a degree, the more focused you are, the more likely you're going to be getting in front of people who are your ideal player or customer. So that's why it's super important to really know what your ideal player, your player persona, your customer's persona is, because if you can't really pinpoint it to a degree, then you could be targeting to someone that might not be an ideal player. And if they're not an ideal player, you're wasting money on someone potentially that really isn't going to be interested in your game. And when you're running ads, you want to be as effective as possible. So that's why you got to start thinking in this mindset. And again, it's everything else that you're doing too. If you're not really trying to do your best to get inside that ideal player's head, then it's really going to be a challenge to get those people to sign up for whatever you're doing or to get them to purchase your game. So again, making sure that you know your audience. Good. And a very simple and basic one is, by knowing your audience, you're also going to know, is this actually a platform that they're considering or that they're using, right? So if your audience is, let's say, much younger demographic, and you have a mobile game, for example, maybe TikTok is a really good platform for you, because there you go, you have a younger audience here, demographic, there, and you can run ads on TikTok too, and that might be a better platform for you, because you're being cognizant of, is that your ideal target base? So that's why it's important to really know your audience and where they potentially are and things like that. Now, how do you choose platform campaign objectives, right? Well, again, this is going back to asking the question why you should consider, or things that you should think about and talk about in terms of why should you run ads. But this goes a little bit deeper, right? So you might have a specific reason why you're thinking of running ads, but when it's coming to platform campaign objectives, those get more specific. And I'm going to simplify this here. It's either like traffic, awareness, or conversions, right? Or even installs in some cases. So again, you just want to go back to the reasons for wanting to run ads, and then you want to consider what those objectives are. And sometimes these objectives will change based off of what you're doing. Quick example. You want to increase your Steam wish list, okay? Now, you can't track, for example, you can't track how that performance with a tracking pixel or a tracking code from Facebook, for example, or any platform. You can't put it on Steam's site. So the only real objective that you can use is just traffic or link clicks. So you kind of makes that decision for you based off of what's available to you to attribute the results and the performance going on with that, right? But then let's say if you are running ads to your website to get more email signups. Well, there's a couple of options. You could run a conversion-focused campaign objective, which the campaign is going to do the best it can to optimize itself to get more conversions. In this case, it would be an email signup. In that case, you can put tracking onto your website that can then attribute that goal, that action people are taking, that email signup, and attribute it back to the campaign. So that way the system can do a better job at getting in front of the people that are more likely to convert, right? So that's how you kind of can determine these things. Now, there are some nuances to this. I don't want to necessarily go into details. These are more of just examples of things you should consider when you're doing this. But in general, a good place to probably start is, I would say the one I would always focus on is just having people go to your landing page, go to your site, and focus based off of that. Can get a lot more detailed here, but again, this is just a high-level approach and being mindful of these things. And then how do you, excuse me, and then how do you start and narrow your targeting? Well, it really comes down to what type of users you're targeting, right? So example, you want more Steam wish lists. Well, if that's the case, most people on Steam are using their desktop, right? Or the computer. So you don't necessarily want to be marketing to mobile users. So you kind of want to eliminate them. However, if you have a mobile game, well then, of course you want to also be marketing to mobile users, right? So just be cognizant of, again, where people are going, where you're going to be directing them to. Because something like Steam, if you open up to mobile users, you probably see that you're spending a lot of money. Your cost per click might be really low, but you're not getting any wish lists or conversions, as I like to generally call these main things. So you got to be mindful of that as well. A couple other things too, going a little bit further. What should your focus be if you're starting from scratch? And I'm talking more so on from a targeting perspective here, right? Again, it goes back to knowing your audience. Super important. Know who they are, what their interests are, and start basing your targeting off of what you know about your audience. But then also, you want to build up custom audiences. Like Facebook's a great one that allows you to do this. Google, all the other platforms should allow you to do this as well. And I know I'm generalizing a lot of this here, but still, that's the key focus. And here's why: the sense when you're starting from scratch, you really want to work your way down towards to having an audience that is very likely to take action on the result you're looking for. Okay, so to start with that, that's why it's important to know your audience. So you're going to take interest groups that you have available for your targeting and set up your targeting based off of that. And then when you have people going on landing pages and such, you can take some of that information depending on where they're going. May not be applicable to Steam because, like I said, you can't really track information on Steam from these advertising platforms. But if it's your website and an email sign up, you can have people go there, and then depending on their behavior when they get to the site, are they signing up? If you have analytics or with pixel tracking, you can actually put in other metrics that say hey, are they staying on there a long time on the page? And if they if you have a YouTube video, for example, that you embedded onto the site and they're watching the whole thing or taking other certain actions, whatever it might be, those could be other indicators that okay, anybody who's going to this page, like 25% of them are taking this type of action, showing really good behavior, showing that they're interested, engaged. Well, you can now start building up an audience from driving that traffic to being like, okay, these are really good, people to consider, and then building a custom audience, and then now they're showing behaviors that that they're engaged, and now you can use that to target, with things like lookalike audiences. I know I'm going into some really detailed stuff, but the point is, you're starting from a high point. You're starting from a very broad point. You're driving traffic, and then based off of how people behave, then you are building an audience that is lower funneled, right? They're more likely to act on this because they're more engaged. And then you take that audience and target to people that show those same type of behaviors. And then let's say they're actually signing up for your emails. So you're taking now that audience, and then it's a downward funnel where you're just taking those core behaviors and then continuing to market to other people that show those behaviors too. That's, again, why one of the reasons, like, a lot of platforms can offer this too, but why Facebook is such a popular one, because they can do a really good job at nailing down those behaviors. And it's basically because of how the platform has been set up. So if you're starting from scratch, that's what I would do. Start with knowing your audience, doing some initial research behind like what those audiences are. Let's say whether it's game titles that they like, or just the game types or genres. And then starting out from there, and then just seeing how they behave when they get to that landing page, if you're able to monitor that type of activity. Now, what should your focus be, though, if you already have something? And when I say something, I mean specifically like something like an email list. You're already getting tons of traffic to your website, things like that. Well, again, know your audience, right? There you go. That's a simple one, because you should still try some of that targeting and such too, to see how well it can perform for you, and especially when reaching out to new people who might not have heard about your game before. And that's a lot of why you would want to advertise too, right? But then also leverage that current audience you do have. So if it's like traffic to your website, great, but even better, and this is, if you have this, I would lead with this. I would even bother with the traffic to your website, is leverage that email list that you already have. And what I mean specifically about this is simply creating things like, and I'm again just using Facebook as an example, lookalike audiences, where you're taking that list, you're putting it into creating an audience within Facebook, and you're saying, hey, of these people, I want you to take this list and find anybody else who kind of exhibits their same behaviors type things. That's all you're doing. You're not marketing to those people already in your list. That's not what it would be doing in this case when you're creating a lookalike audience. Some platforms offer similar capabilities, but in a lot of cases, they if you're like a smaller advertiser and things like that, you can't use that functionality. But Facebook, that's what's cool and so accessible about Facebook, is because you don't need a whole lot for it to be able to have something to work with and get pretty good targeting. So if you already have something, I would, in like a list like that, I would start focusing there, because you're going to find that, again, the lower funnel everything is, if you already have people on a list, they're already active, they're already engaged, and you can target people with those similar behaviors, that's going to perform a lot better in some cases than trying to work that an audience that you're just is based off of interest alone. Okay. And this is also coming from a lot of experience I have managing campaigns and everything else too. All right, now let's discuss a really key and important thing here. Probably one of the most important things outside of knowing your audience, which is your messaging, creative, and the user journey. Now, to lead this particular topic, I really want everyone to think about what the user experience is, what the user journey is like, especially for players that are seeing your game for the first time, right? So the number one thing I would consider, and this definitely applies to everything else that you're doing from a promotional standpoint. I don't care where you're sharing things about your game, on your Steam page, on different social media channels, on other forums, websites. I don't care what it is. You want to make sure that whatever you're promoting, is your messaging clear? I cannot emphasize this enough. And you know what? Sometimes it can be hard because you get so entrained and tunnel visioned that you might think, oh, this messaging is super clear. People know what it means. But if you show it to someone for the first time, they might be like, I don't know what this game's about. I mean, sure, I know it's a roguelike, but yeah, right? So you just want to make sure whatever you're promoting, it's very clear, okay? And let's drill down on this a little bit further. So one thing is, does your image and video align with your messaging too? Okay, because what I mean by this, and if you have an image that does a good job conveying what your game is, like whether it's a screenshot or if it's other types of promotional marketing material, does it clearly state or showcase or show what your game is about, right? And then on top of that, does the messaging also help clearly define the same thing that's going on in the image? Because if it doesn't, this is how people will react. They'll see an ad, like, oh, that image looks really cool. And let's say it's just showing first-person shooter, right? Pretty clear, definitive, that. But then it says something completely different. Maybe it's more story or narrative focused, and it doesn't say anything about what's happening in the image. People may not look at that and be like, they could just simply be confused. So that's why it's really important to make sure that what you're showing for an image is also very clear and distinct in terms of, hey, this is a good representation of what your game is about in this image. And that your messaging, here's a good way of saying it. Make it blatantly obvious, and almost redundant, that what you're saying for your ad copy is also the same as what you're putting as what the image is. And now I'm not saying describe what the image is, but just make it blatantly obvious, like, okay, these are both the same. Because again, if that doesn't happen, or if you don't do a good job at that, you'll find that it can confuse people. But here's another way to figure this out too. When you're running ads, one ad, if you run just a couple and maybe some variations, what I would probably do is maybe have variations of copy to start and maybe an image, the same image for all of them, and see which one does better. There you go. And then that will give you good enough insight to determine, okay, one is definitely a little bit more clearly defined, or I'm taking a different approach to it, whatever the case may be, and in revealing on not only what is more clearly defined, but also what may resonate better with people. A few things about imagery or even videos too is it might be worth having branding, but it's good to test. You don't want it to overtake the whole thing, but have branding on there, right? That's like the game name or whatever. Because if people are looking at it real quick, and they see the branding though, and they see the image, sometimes what people do is they'll actually go out of their window or into whether it's a different browser, whether it's a different tab, and they'll do a quick search on Steam. So they won't even click on your ad, and they might do that, okay? And then also, high contrast images work well. Why? Because they really stand out. If everything is really dark and hard to see, again, from a visual perspective, if that's not clearly defined in your screenshot, your image, whatever you're using, if it's kind of dark and hard to make out things, that's not going to catch people's eyes. But something that has contrasting colors, bright colors that pop, really stand out, and again, think of the platform, like I mentioned before. Some people have a dark mode, and they might just have the regular mode, which is standard, white. What are things that can really stand out? Look at other things that people are posting pictures and stuff. What are the things that stand out? There's very unique color palettes, things like that. It's also dependent on how your game is, but still, be mindful of those things. You don't want dark images, for example, or images that are so washed out, they kind of blend in with the background. Be mindful of that stuff. And also with your player journey, and creating this alignment with everything, does your landing page align with your ads? So let's say you're getting people to go to Steam. Does the type of images or screenshots you have on your Steam page, is it very similar to your ads? Is the messaging on your Steam page similar to what you're saying in your ads? Because remember how I gave that example earlier about if your image doesn't necessarily align with your messaging or vice versa, it can create confusion. If your ad doesn't have the same messaging for when people are going to your Steam page or signing up for an email list or whatever the other landing page might be, if there's a disconnect from the ad to your landing page, it will cause confusion. If you cause confusion, you create friction. If you create friction, that lowers the likelihood of people to take the action you want them to take. So be mindful of if your landing page also aligns with your ad, because if it doesn't, it can reduce numbers. And like I mentioned earlier, you also want to test variations of copies and images, possibly even ad formats too. There's a variety of different things. Just to throw out a quick tip, or the ones I like to use are generally single image ads, or if they're not image, just single image, you could also use video. And without going into detail, there's a lot of other different things you can do too. For example, one thing you could consider, I look into it if it's of interest or it's one of your objectives, or you could do lead ads. But there's a lot of other where people could not even leave the platform. This is one of those examples I was telling you about before, where if you keep people on the platform, usually those platforms will reward you for it, usually in the form of like lower costs. So your ads will serve better, get in front of more people. And a lead ad, if it was specifically you're trying to generate email signups, you could get people to sign up right on the platform. There's extra work. You have to export like the people who sign up into your mailing list. Okay, it can be a little messy. There's ways to streamline it. But the point being is you can get a lot of, and all they have to do is hit their phone on the ad twice, like click, and there you go. You got those people that are interested in signing up for your email list. You want to probably incentivize them with a freebie or something, whatever. Again, different subject there. But the point being is there's cool ways that you can try out different ad formats that are still getting you what you're looking for, and even possibly getting you even greater results because you're being cognizant or mindful of the platform's objectives and also your own objectives. So those types of things are things you would want to consider in testing out. And another thing too, let's say if you're still like hearing all this so far and you're considering these things, and let's say you're a little bit more apprehensive or whatever your reasons are for not wanting to commit to something like this, it's always okay to test with other platforms that aren't paid advertising platforms. Like I think one place that's really good to kind of test things out a little bit with messaging and images and such. And it can vary, and it's very nuanced too, but like Reddit, right? Because you can post stuff there and get a really good sense of what people are going to say. I wouldn't let that be the end-all answer in terms of determining whether or not you should or want to run ads, but it can give you some extra insight too, okay? All right, now, I want to talk about numbers, because all this probably sounds okay, great, whatever, but without knowing numbers, there really is no real reason to run ads, because the last thing you want to do is just aimlessly throw money for the sake of it or getting more exposure. I have dealt with people in past numerous times actually where they have money to run ads and they're like, let's just get it going. And it's like, well, we really got to think about like what's a return on investment. And if you're thinking about like just running it for an awareness perspective, if there's no real call to action or KPI, which is key performing indicator, or your key metric essentially, like a wish list, email sign up, purchase, like I wouldn't really want to consider running ads. And I'm also speaking to everyone here as a listener and being mindful of what probably your goals and objectives are too, right? So you want to know your numbers. You want to be cognizant of that. And also from an awareness perspective, if you're just running ads and you're being mindful of this, you're going to create awareness anyways. So don't, I wouldn't be too off guard on that. Really know your numbers. And also what I'm talking about specifically here is knowing your return on investment, because that's important. At the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to in deciding your ads. And how to go about doing that. And what I share with you here too can also be applied to everything else that you're doing. And I'm going to break it down for you in a moment on how you can go about doing this, okay? Now, the first thing you got to consider is what time and resources are you putting into your advertising? So specifically, 1, what's your budget? You might not have a budget. If you have a budget, you might not know what it should be. Any number of things. Here, I'll help you out with that. Ideally, I would say the minimum I'd probably want to start with, for anybody who's testing things out, probably $150. That's USD. So do the conversion for wherever you're located. But I would say 150. And I would say the minimum time period for that amount would be 14 days. And that would be about $10 a day. Now, in the past, I have had another episode that talks about ads as well. Said you can go as low as $5, and I still stand behind that number too. But it can be amazing on how much more results that you can get, or information and learnings from just doubling that up. So $10 a day, right? That'd be the minimum. 150, 2 weeks. Ideally, what I would suggest to people is doing about a month and around $500. Okay, just to start, and that gives you a lot to work with and learn from, and everything else. Okay, so there's some insight, and again, it can be relative and everything else, but and I'm trying to just provide some blanket ballpark figures here for people to work with. Now, another thing to consider, are you hiring someone or are you managing the ads internally? So when you're hiring someone, you got to factor in the costs, okay? But if you are managing ads internally, and this is really important because a lot of people forget this part, and you don't want to forget this. Like, how do you make sure you track your time with everything you're doing relating to this? That's going into the research, like the audience research. Are you targeting interest that correctly? Are you looking at all the other possibilities that like the platforms offer? Are you being mindful of like if some platforms don't offer it as specific interest targeting as others, let's say strategy games, right? And they don't have anything else, just strategy game. Or it's like, I have a strategy game, but what are the other subgenres that can include in that, right? Just be mindful of that. That's what audience research is, being aware of that type of stuff. What is it to set it up? How much time is it taking you to set up everything from a tracking pixel if you need that, or to the campaign and setting up all the audience targeting, and then setting up the ads and putting in your UTM tracking parameters, because remember, Steam does allow that now. What time is associated with that in the management? Like when you're changing ads, when you're changing ad copy, when you're changing out, you're cycling it out, when you're like everything that you're doing with that, get an idea, especially with the setup, of what that time is, and also and calculate your whatever your rate is, or your team member's rate, and then take the hours and multiply by that rate. And it's really an important thing to consider, because even if there's someone out there that's a like a freelancer or whatever that can help you with this, their rate might be a little bit higher than what you want to pay. But if you're calculating all the costs and time and it's associated with setting up and doing that, and plus you're still probably not going to know as much as someone else, that could be very costly in the end too. So that's why it's important to think that. Now, I'm not trying to downplay the fact that doing all that work can be a very, very valuable tool. And in fact, to some degree, I I sometimes encourage it, because it's not to say you should do that all the time and you're going to now be an ads marketer, for example, or ads freelancer. But the more you know about that stuff, the more cognizant you're going to be a lot more confident and aware, and be really more in tune with your business. Okay, so there are benefits to doing that as well. But still, it's important to consider how should you hire someone? Are you managing the ads internally? And in either case, what are those final costs? What's the cost of hiring someone, but also what are the costs for you doing all the work, or a team member doing the work? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to factor that into what your results are. So let's talk about results. Know your numbers. What are your numbers, right? At a really high level, I would say you want to know your spend, and not just your ad spend, the spend that's dedicated to running these ads, but again, your total investment. Like I just said, the time that you're spending and what that cost is, or the total investment that's also includes the cost of the rate of someone you're hiring. You also want to know your traffic. What traffic are these ads generating? When you're doing this, I would say it's good to use an analytics tool, whether it's the Steam tool itself with the UTM tracking, or your analytics. Because depending on the objectives with certain campaigns, like I think Twitter will do one, and I'm sure other ones, but especially Facebook, if it's showing just link clicks, that is not necessarily a landing page view. Because here's the main thing. When it says link click, on certain platforms, we'll just say Facebook, for example, they could click on a link, and that link could be going to your Facebook page, which they will then count as a link click. That is not going to your landing page. So be mindful of that. That's why when I say traffic, make sure it's some type of baseline analytic tool that you're using that with. And like I said, Steam or like Google Analytics is a good one to use. And then from those numbers, you can actually then calculate and then conversions, right? So if you're doing wish lists or purchases, you definitely want to add your UTM links to those landing pages of your ads. But then also you want to do your figure out your conversion rate, which is basically the traffic to conversions, and then also your cost per conversion, which is your spend to your conversion. It's easier to start just your total ad spend, but again, you want to be mindful of those other costs that I mentioned before too. And what are your conversions? It could be anything from email signups, like Steam focused. So, again, wish lists or, purchases and things like that. Now, the reason why you want to know these numbers is for the most important reason of all, and that is your ROI, return on investment, or your return on ad spend. Now, here's the thing. Depending on what you're doing at this point in time, whether you're getting email signups for your Kickstarter campaign or whatever, you may have to estimate what your return on investment is. Kind of stinks, but because you don't have a hard number you don't know how many people are backed your campaign yet because you haven't launched it, you have to estimate, right? But the cool thing is there's ways to go about doing this to get a pretty good idea on how it's going to do. Okay? So let's take some examples. Let's do email signups. First things first. What are the email signups used for? Let's just say you're going to have a Kickstarter campaign in the future. All right? And you want to build up that email list so that way when it launches, you can reach out to these people in your email list. They're active. If you're keeping them engaged, you're getting them to Discord, great. There's a good chance that they're going to be backers as well. So let's just take some very basic numbers here. Let's say you run $200 for a Facebook campaign. And you ran that campaign and you were getting about $2 per email sign up. Okay? That's about 100 emails. Okay, not bad. So let's just say of that email list, they're really engaged and everything else. you're going to convert about 25%. Maybe a little high, maybe not. I'm just trying to be as realistic as possible. But you can easily create a spreadsheet to kind of like give yourself a range too. But let's say 25% of those 100 emails you got are going to convert. So that's 25 people. They're backers for your Kickstarter campaign. Now, in general, with a Kickstarter campaign, you're going to have an average price point or your main tier, or the tier that performs the most. And let's say that tier is $20, all right? So in general, that could be people signing up for an early bird at like a discounted price for, I don't know, $17, $15, or it could mean someone's signing up for a higher level tier at $75, whatever the dollar amount. But again, our average is 20. So we'll take that. Now we'll take that 25 people that we're estimating that will convert 25% of those 100 emails, and we multiply it by 20. Now that gets us $500. So from that $200 campaign you just spent, you made $500. So that's a $300 return on your investment there, essentially. Again, we haven't calculated. I'm not going to do it now, but we haven't calculated in the costs that associated with that. But just from that campaign alone, you got $300, or you got about 250% return on ad spend. And when it comes to return on ad spend, I would say you want to shoot for anything over 200%. If you get 100%, that basically means you broke even. Now, that's not a bad thing, but we're not in this to break even. We're in this to, get more out of make our dollars work more for us, right? So that's how you do that. That's how I estimated that. Again, you can play around with some numbers, but that's for email signups, for example. And to be honest, I think $2 is a little high for email. You could do it for 100, but for the sake of this example, that's why I did 2 or whatever. To give even at $2, you're still getting a 250% return with that figure, okay? Now, let's do wish lists. It's a little different. So, important thing with wish lists to be able to properly attribute these things is using your UTMs. With email signups, like I said, you could go to your site, you can track things, those goals and conversions and whatever through the tracking pixel, etc. But with wish lists, you got to use your UTMs. You got to add them in the back of your the landing page URL, so that way you can properly attribute. Quick side note here. I've noticed that, and I know it's still in beta or whatever for the Steam's UTM tracking, it can be all over the place. It can be delayed. Just be mindful of that. And the chances are that you're probably actually getting a little bit better results than what they're showing there too. So just be mindful of that and such when you're using your UTMs for Steam. So similar example, let's say $200 campaign spend. Definitely should be right at the dollar mark for a wish list. It can vary. It's okay if it's a little bit more, but the goal, $1 per wish list. So let's say for $200 spent on your campaign, you get 200 wish lists. Awesome. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head what the ideal conversion. It might be a little bit high in this example, but let's say 15% of that of the wish list convert. So at 15% of 200, that's about, let's say we're estimating 30 units sold. So let's say your game costs about $20. And you had 30 people that purchased units. Now we're looking at $600. Again, not just the cost that of your time or someone doing this, being mindful, and this also applies to Kickstarter too, but be mindful of the percentage cut that platform takes. I think Kickstarter is like 8%, right around there, and obviously Steam is 30%. Not really worth working that in right at the moment because it's kind of going to be peanuts in the grand scheme of things, okay? But here we go, $20, 30 units sold, that's $600. Now you're looking at $400 that you gained from that 200 you ran, or 300% return on ad spend. So this is why going through this process and everything is really important to know when you're considering ads and estimating what that could be. right? And again, these numbers can shift. Everybody's numbers are going to look different. You could be higher, you could be lower. But again, going through these exercises and really understanding these things is important. And ads aside, remember how I said I'd break this thing a little bit further and how it can apply to you and everything you're doing with your marketing? Well, remember how I told you about, hey, if you're going to do your ads yourself, track the time it takes you to learn this stuff. But also, that tracking is really important to everything else that you're doing. If you're just making posts on Reddit, if you're doing running conventions, what is the time and other investment of resources it takes to put these things together? So get a dollar amount. Once you get that dollar amount, so let's say you're running Reddit posts all the time or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, it cost me like $200 a month to do that. And then what's the return? And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to track. You could throw UTMs, whatever. But when you start doing this and then you start breaking it down, you can actually get a return on investment or numbers by using the same equations I just laid out here. So it's like I did this amount of work. It cost this, whatever it is. That's why time tracking is important. And I was able to get this type of conversion rate. So people went to my site. I had a goal set up and know that of everybody coming from Reddit, 26% convert and sign up for my email. And then if that email list is going to be used at first for, let's say, a Kickstarter campaign or even a game sales, then then you can start estimating what campaigns, what marketing efforts, what platforms are doing the best work for you. And then you can optimize and really focus more on those particular platforms. So I hope it's somewhat clear on what I explained here and why having this like ad mindset can help you with literally everything else that you're doing. And I know you talked about email signups and wish lists. Like wish lists, basically, those two steps, all they provide is the estimation part. The cool thing about with a purchase, you know what, basically, if you direct their traffic, they make a purchase, you know what that purchase amount is, and you know what the cost per that purchase was. As long as you want to, and that where it's more important to calculate what the percentage of that Steam takes out and stuff, because then you want to make sure, you know, what's your profit margin, what do you want to be getting, and what are you willing to spend on getting that purchase, because you probably don't want to spend more. I'm throwing out number, but you probably ideally as low as possible, but you probably don't want to spend like more than $5 for like a $20 game or whatever. Ideally, you wouldn't. You could probably do a little bit more, but again, you want that as low as possible. But it's a lot easier to calculate. And both of those equations I outlined for you basically have that in there because you don't have to do the extra steps of guessing. All right. Now, we talked about, the messaging and things you should consider and stuff like that. I'm going to start wrapping this up a little bit and talking about the benefits, lessons learned, and some tips, okay? Benefits. Using ads in general can help you learn valuable information way faster than if you're doing this yourself from like an organic perspective. And like, doing your own posts, whatever it might be. And how can this, and what are examples of this? You can easily determine at a fast rate what messaging worked well. You can cycle things out pretty quickly and everything else. It's really cool. You can also determine what your targeting was and what worked better on that. The cool thing too is with your tracking parameters for Steam, if you set it up in a way where you can easily identify the campaign, like I had this ad set, let's use Facebook for example. I use this ad set, which is my general interest targeting ad set, and you list that down as like, let's say your medium, and then you have your ad, and I ran ad 1.2. And so you have specific information that shows up in Steam, and you could see the wish list count and everything else. And then when you compare that to all your other campaigns or ad sets that you're running, you can easily determine like, outside of what Facebook is showing and what it served the best of, you could go drill down there and be like, oh, wow, Facebook, drove a lot of this traffic for this ad, but clearly in Steam, this other one got me a lot more wish lists or whatever the goal was, the objective was. So that is really, really helpful in especially determining on and being mindful of what was that imagery, right? What was that messaging? What was even the targeting behind it? That is super, super helpful for everything else that you're doing. It can really help you make better decisions with everything else that you're doing. Another cool thing that's really a big benefit is how people commented on your ads. As I mentioned before, there's other places you can do that to get comments on this stuff, but people are in a different environment. They're in a different space on some of these platforms, so they might might be more insightful on that. So one thing is, like, did they validate things for you, or were they a little bit more truthful? Did they call you out on some things? I've had experiences before where, and a little quick tip here is, I was trying to make a claim. I was stating a claim, like, not this crazy, but this is the best game ever, right? That's a pretty absurd claim. Well, if you're making a claim, it's not substantiated, and people call you out on it, that gives you a clear indication, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't use that messaging anymore, right? Or at least tweak it differently so it doesn't imply what that person thought it did. So are they calling you out about your messaging or the creative that you use? Like, oh, wow, that looks kind of crappy, and maybe the image was a little bit distorted or something. I mean, you wouldn't want that from the get-go, but hey, it happens. Or did they validate things for you, as I mentioned? Is what you thought what they're also saying, which is always good when that happens, because then it's aligning. What you're thinking could be good and stuff is aligning what they're thinking, and that's always a good sign. Other cool things too, when they're commenting on stuff, they could tag their friends. They could tag other people, and that's a form of, without just directly sharing the ad, they're getting people to look at it and comment, and there could be conversations about it. Some really cool things that can happen with just running your ads and getting you way more exposure than you typically could. Or actually, when that happens, it's not necessarily viral. There's potential that could happen. I don't see it really that often, but what's really cool is that when they're tagging other people in on that stuff, it's making your money work more for you, because you created that possibility where now people are doing that, and you're just getting that much further reach, and you'll see your costs going down, and all great things happen when that happens. But more importantly, it's the fact that people are seeing something that they're excited about and want to share with others. That's always a good thing. Another cool thing that happens too, and I mentioned this earlier too, is did your general wish list conversion rate increase? That's something to look for, especially depending on your objectives. Because sometimes if you're talking about your game, even if you're having people go to your landing page on your website to get email addresses, if you have some type of branding in there associated with the game, like people will go out of the browser or open up another tab, and they'll search Steam for it too. So you could be running ads for email sign up or Steam, and even if they don't attribute it directly because they're not clicking on the ad, you could see other numbers increase too, or your follower count can increase as well. So don't just be looking out for and monitoring results just directly associated with your campaign. Look at the bigger picture too, because you can find out that that not everything's going to be attributed to these efforts, but they could help actually impact the overall what's happening with other information or other things that are being acted on. Another thing too is using ads can scale things significantly. Big one here, just time and numbers increase. So that's what I said before. Time can be very precious and valuable, and depending on what your goals and your objectives is, or how fast you need something or not, saving you time and stuff could mean that time can now be allocated to other areas of your project, right? So that's why that's really important to consider too, because you can scale things a lot more than you can. What results you could get from a viral Reddit post might not equate to the number of running ads for a certain amount of time, right? I mean, So there's lots of different things to look at, or I guess a viral Reddit post would work really well in your favor. But let's say if you're making a bunch of posts and they are getting some attention stuff, but they're not to the same level of your ads, it's good. And then, like I said, with your return on investment, you could still break down those numbers to determine what's more effective for you. But again, in most cases, running ads can really help scale and save you time and everything. Another thing too is you can get better quality results potentially, because remember the level of targeting I mentioned earlier about really being able to get in front of people that exhibit certain behavioral characteristics, and then the platform could then look out and find other people just like your ideal player. That means if these systems are a much better job than just simply posting elsewhere, that means you could actually get better quality wish lists or other results. And if that's the case, better quality means those people are more likely than not to convert when your game goes to sale. So another other thing. So there's a lot of benefits that can really come out of this. And what's really great more than anything is from all these benefits alone, all this information, all this learning can be applied to other marketing campaigns. That's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways more than anything is everything that you're doing. And even if it doesn't work out as well as you would like it to, you could still take that and be like, okay, I know saying this a certain way didn't really work out or resonate well with the people. So I'm going to make sure that when I am making other initiatives elsewhere, not to do that, because I know now it doesn't work. Now, lesson learned and some tips here. Remember how I mentioned before, if your game is going to be priced too low, it's probably not worth running ads. And when I say too low, I would say the good mark or threshold is anything between like, I would keep it like $15. If it's lower than $15, I probably wouldn't want to run ads, for that. Now, there could be some nuances. Let's say even at $15, your wish list conversion rate for whatever reason is like really high, and right. And let's assume that those are quality wish lists too. If that's the case, then it might be worthwhile to consider that. But in most cases, I'm being very general here, I would say you probably wouldn't want to consider running ads if it was like lower than $15, because then you're just getting too much risk. Remember I set a goal, you want a return on ad spend around 200%. Then you're risking having it be a bit lower, or risking just getting it too much closer to 100% or below that. If it's anything below 100%, you're now not breaking even, you're losing money. And you don't want that to happen, right? There's any number of different reasons where that can be okay in very different dramatic situations. But for everyone listening here, that's probably not a model you want to do. All right, you don't want. You're not in a position to lose money, so we don't want that to happen. So again, remember, be mindful of what your price point of your game, because if it's much lower than that, it's probably not worth it. And when using ads for the first time, this is really important, by the way. Treat it as a test and be okay with getting nothing. And this still applies with if you ran ads 6 months ago and now you're running ads again, or even a year, whatever. Treat the first period as a test. And if you don't want to have, let's say $500 is a lot, you still are okay with doing it. Maybe just slow down the momentum starting out. Maybe it's not $15 a day. Maybe it's $5 a day. Get some stuff going, get some results, and then build off of that. But still, treat it as a test. Whatever you're starting out with, especially if it's the first time, set aside a certain period of time and treat it as a test, and be okay with whatever budget you're setting to start with. If I lose this, that it's okay, and I'm also going to learn from all these other learnings that I can take in and apply elsewhere. Think of it with that mindset, because I think what will happen is if you look at it really hoping you're going to get the best results possible, and it doesn't happen, it's easily going to put a bad taste in your mouth, and you'll probably won't consider ads again, or you just or it just won't allow you to be put in the right mindset to learn the most you possibly can. So be okay with losing. It's like the people who go with gambling, go out gambling with friends or family or whatever, and they're like, oh, okay, here, I have $200. I'm okay if I lose it all. I'm just here to have a good time or have fun. And what happens? If they lose it all, they don't get upset. They're like everything else. And if they win, even better, right? It's kind of similar, different, but that's the mindset you want to approach. I think you're going to get more than if you were to gamble money away. And I don't want to compare this to gambling at all, but that's the mindset you should have. Look at, if I don't get anything out of this, what I ideally want, especially starting out, then at least I got this learning. At least I can apply this information. At least I did it in an amount of time that was way less and saved me time, money, resources than if I did it other ways and took that much time and took away from my project, right? That's the way you got to approach it. So when you're doing it first time, be okay with, just treating it as a test, because you are going to learn a lot from it. Don't set and forget your campaign, okay? And if you're working with someone, make sure they don't do that either. Because the reality of things are, especially with a platform like Facebook, you need to be cycling out your creative. You need to be testing out different things, because you could put something out there, it's doing great. Over time, people are going to keep seeing the same thing, like, all right, I already saw it, okay, I'm not that interested, or just because eventually it will start cycling through to the same point where everybody's like seeing it again. You will exhaust your audience at some point in time. But also, you're not necessarily learning anything from doing that. If you're running the one ad for all this time, you're never going to really learn too much about what other stuff might resonate. Maybe it does well, but a different ad could do better, or vice versa. You want to know that stuff, and just setting something up and running it and letting it do its own thing and don't check on it, and you're not going to get a good return on that. I can guarantee it. And plus, people like seeing new things about your game. If you're always just showing the same thing, and let's say that image you're using for an ad is also the same one you used before everywhere else, that's not going to be as exciting. But if you're sharing something new, let's say a different angle, a different level, I don't know, just anything slightly different, and cycle out with some other different creative, that could really help out tremendously. So consider those things as well too. Let's see, what else? Yeah, so definitely don't set and forget. And if you ran ads that were successful before, it gives you better insight to performance when running campaigns to non-trackable platforms. So here's what I'm saying. We talked about Steam. Because of UTMs, you can now track. But let's say you're launching your game and it's going on Nintendo, or it's going on whatever other platform that you don't have tracking with, and way less insight than you do to Steam. Well, if you already ran ads and have insight and direction in terms of, hey, I know this targeting, this stuff, and if we cycle it at this frequency, can work really well. So for those of you who are working with publishers, they will probably have good insight to what works well and everything too, right? But if you already did the work to build up an email list or run your own ads and be like, hey, when we were running these to our Steam page, we got this number and this number and this number, and you didn't run ads for a while, but now you're launching and they're willing to manage and help run your ads too, well, that information is going to help them do their job even better, right? So And when they're doing that and you have this information and know what performs really well, when you're running to platforms you're kind of in the dark with, because you can't properly attribute. You just get a little report that says you sold some units on Nintendo eShop. Well, and that's all you know. Well, at least you know you can lead with confidence, or help your partners or whoever else lead with confidence that if you run ads like this or similar to this, it's probably going to do work to our benefit. So that's why it's really important too. If you have considered running ads, another reason to consider down the line, if you do get a partnership, you have a publisher, or you just want to run ads again and you are ported in or distributed in different platforms, you can lead with confidence in those areas and market to those pages as well too, if that's part of your objective, your plans or whatever. So that's another major benefit right there too. and a lesson as well. Another thing too is monitor campaign activity probably like every other day to weekly. Don't do it daily and then based off of daily performance change stuff. It'll drive you nuts and it won't work. If you're always changing something, it's not giving the system enough time to update, correct, or do its thing to optimize. You're just going to be making a mess of your campaigns. Don't do it. And because patience is definitely helpful, but you don't, again, want to set and forget, right? And then track when you make changes. If you're doing this yourself, track when you make a change. And then you can plot out what those changes are, what are some of your goals and objectives for hitting certain numbers. Again, going back to like, those know your numbers type things and conversion rates, things like that. Because you can see like when you put in a new ad or put in a new image and see how stuff like outperforms compared to everything else. Well, then you want to try to duplicate that. And maybe not copy paste type situation, but at least it gives you enough insight to like, okay, now we know it really works and does well. So that's basically, those types of things are going to be really effective in helping you determine this. And again, these similar processes and practices and everything else that we talked about is very beneficial and helpful to what you're doing with all your other marketing efforts. So I hope that this big, huge deep dive, even though we, like I said, the format and the focus was around was around ads, was helpful. As a masterclass episode with just me talking, it's weird because I'm so used to talking to someone else here, and I hope it's not super weird for you guys because I know you could get in the groove of listening to something. So still, I hope it was helpful in that sense, especially in this particular subject as well. But I can't emphasize enough that while the format and everything was really structured around ads, that how this can be applied to everything else you're doing with your marketing, knowing your numbers, looking at things objectively, and taking that information and making really smart and efficient and effective decisions with everything you're doing to promoting your game. All right. So to summarize, know the reason why you're thinking about doing ads, or not just ads, but anything in general. What's the reason? What's your objective? What's your goal? Really know that reason. Because if you don't, it's going to be that much harder to figure out what's working for you, what's not, what's getting you to what you ultimately want to achieve. Know your audience. You know it. I've said it so many times on the show before. Know your audience. And also know the platform. If you become more familiar and understanding of the platform, what's their objectives and reason, you can be really creative in some instances and how you're using ads or how you're even approaching people on that platform. What are they there for? Because if your messaging is more disruptive and not in line with why people are in the platform to begin with, well, that might not work out as well as you would like it to. So know the platform, know why people are there, and try to do your best to be in line with that. And also, remember, be clear with your messaging, imagery, and remember the user journey. You want everything to align from the first time that someone saw your ad or your image or your screenshot, whatever, all the way down to ultimately when they're playing the game. Does that whole experience from when they saw that they got that first impression of you promoting your game all the way down to what the gameplay is like. Because if that's not happening, again, remember, I said, if that doesn't happen, it creates confusion. Confusion creates friction. Friction means less people taking action of the action you want them to take. Remember the user journey. And then know your numbers. It's super important to know your numbers, know how they're working for you, know how they attribute to the overall focus of your campaigns. Because if you don't, you're guessing, you don't know what's happening. It's not good if you don't know what's happening. Yes, you're doing a lot of other things. And yes, those things require your attention and everything else. But you still, as a creator, as someone who wants to do so much more than what you're doing right now in the future, like whatever your future goals are and stuff, you need to have a pulse on these things. You need to know what they're going on. As you grow, it'll become a little bit more natural, but taking the initiative to know these things now, it's going to come more in tune and more in line with your thinking, more in the back of your mind. And it doesn't necessarily mean things are going to get easier, but it does mean you're going to be very cognizant and aware of these things. So that way, when you're moving forward, you're making effective and the right decisions to reach your goals. That's why knowing your numbers is so important. And if you don't know your numbers, work with someone within your team or there's any other means that you can do this to have someone help you align that. Because I know some people, they're like, I'm just very creative part in numbers. I just can't do it. To a degree, you should still keep a pulse on that. But if that means getting someone else involved to help you with that, it's probably worth it, at least at some point in time. And if you can do it now, great. But if not, try to make some initiative on that because it's really important. It can't be an excuse. If it's not your thing, find a way for it so it can be your thing. It might not you be doing it, but you need to be aware of those things. All right. So that was my closing comments, those things to do. I hope everyone really enjoyed this. It's super helpful information. I don't think a lot of people really think this way about these types of things. So again, I hope it was, and I hope it wasn't too boring listening just to me. Please feel free to reach out, IGM Podcast on Twitter. Let me know what you think about this episode. I don't plan on doing too many more about this type of episode in terms of just me talking. But please, I would love to hear your thoughts, ideas on this content. It means a lot to me to know this. And again, it also is helpful to make sure that I'm providing you guys with the best possible episodes and value as well. We'll have more of these masterclasses later too, as promised. But most likely there's going to be a guest who's really diving deep on some pretty cool subjects. So again, thank you all for listening. Look forward to next episode right here on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support us even more by going to Patreon and visiting www.patreon.com/IGM podcast and select the tier that best suits your needs. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.